Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're calling it Testing is Dead, Long Live Automated Testing. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items to go over, just so you can know how to participate in the event. You can submit any text questions to the presenters. There should be a little questions pane in your control panel. You can submit them anytime. I'll be looking for them. And at the end, there'll be time for Q&A, so I'll ask your questions to the panelists. If you have to drop off for any reason, there's a recording available, and you'll get an email with the recording. You can listen to it, you can share it with colleagues and peers. And so now to introduce our panelists. Today we have Roy Nalapeta from Object Edge. He works there on pre-sales consulting, has worked previously in product management, delivery lead, business analyst at Object Edge, and his experience spans retail, banking, healthcare, and e-commerce. We also have Badri Nitor, the co-founder and CEO of Eureka, which is an AI-powered automation platform for testing digital applications. Badri has over 25 years experience in software development and testing in enterprise applications for industries like retail, manufacturing, healthcare, finance, and insurance. And so I'm going to step back. I'll let these guys move forward, and I'll be looking for your questions. If there are any technical issues or questions along the way, feel free to reach out anytime.
Thanks, Sarah, for that excellent introduction. This is Roy Nalapeta. I want to welcome Badri too. Hi, Badri.
Hey, Roy. How are you? And thank you, Sarah, for the introduction.
So, Badri, like Sarah said, testing is dead. Long live automated testing. It's 2019. We're still talking about testing. I asked the question why, but I know that testing has not kept up with the changing paradigms. And cloud is the biggest change as platform operators and platform configurators that we have found as system integrators also. So do you agree with that cloud paradigm statement, Badri?
Absolutely. When you said testing is dead, I would actually qualify it by saying testing the way we have always done it is dead, because we are no longer building software the way we built it. We're no longer consuming software the way we consumed it earlier. So we should not be testing it the way we were testing it earlier. So the old way of testing is dead, but testing is absolutely critical in the new digital age where cloud reigns supreme, and we need to evolve our testing tools and processes and practices to the new paradigm. So I completely agree with your statement that testing has changed and we need to change along with it.
Correct. And I also find that biggest aspects, Badri, when we look at system integrators, right? We did on-premise solutions, we built custom solutions, we built banking software. Testing was critical everywhere. There is always the functional aspect of it, which was all focused upon, and there is the regressive aspect. But what I see in the cloud world was the speed. The speed at which we deliver things, right, is almost instantaneous. Again, I do mean in enterprise instantaneous, not instantaneous in the consumer side instantaneous. But I see that was one of the changes. And multi-platform. Yes, the smart devices, the mobile phones, the iPads, and everything else. But there's also the enterprise need for going away from not just Internet Explorer anymore, right? We're talking about Chrome, we're talking about Opera, we're talking about Firefox, different versions of browser, expanded country reach, and of course the multitude of devices. These were some of the things that occurred to us, Badri. And what I also saw was UX, which is a complete new thought process in the enterprise that we have to care about the user experience, we have to make it user friendly, and we have to make all of this aspect very, very automated. Otherwise, you can't scale it. I saw were the challenges. What are your thoughts on these things?
Absolutely, absolutely. As users are using or consuming software through different mediums. So it could be mobile devices, tablets, it could be desktop devices. The focus of digital or the cloud paradigm is to be able to provide access to users anywhere, anytime, any way the consumer wants to use it. So you touched upon UX. That becomes critical, and devices, because think about the various combinations of mobile devices there are out in the market today and the various form factors that you have. Building UI that can work well with all these different resolutions, different form factors is absolutely critical. And especially as you start looking at commerce and pretty much any transaction you work on in the digital world today, there is some element of commerce. It may not be retail commerce, but there is some level of business transaction that has a monetary value assigned to it, and that makes it extremely important for you to make sure that that experience is absolutely clean and works consistently every time, no matter what device you use. So having that UX focus and device and multi-platform focus is absolutely critical. I agree with you on that.
Correct. On the multi-platform, one thing we notice, Badri, is the multitude of environments. Like cloud, we can spin out a server anytime. We need to
Mhm.
deploy it multiple times. We need to deploy it for different regions. I think testing also has to keep up with that kind of a thing. Why? Because different people have to deliver into different environments, and being aware about different platforms, like we discussed, I thought was an important aspect. So, but Badri, when I think about all of this, right, there are also the changes that are occurring. We're not building ground up applications anymore, right?
Mhm.
When I say that, we're not building ground up applications anymore, because the change is not just feature building. It happens with a huge speed because the platform comes with these features. Maybe you should talk about where you see changes coming from, because you're more, what do you call, entrenched into the testing aspect, right? So I want to
Absolutely.
figure out what you were going to think about these ideas.
So if you think about, you talked about how we were testing previously. We talked about testing is dead, right? So when we previously you looked at anytime an application is changed, there was a set of code changes that were applied, and IT or your development team then promoted that to different environments out into production. You tested it at each one of those points, and that was all great. But with cloud and digital applications, the emphasis is now on platforms, be it for and you see this all around, whether platforms for e-commerce, for CRM, for ERP, no matter what business function you're looking for, there are platforms out there that empower the business to roll out solutions a lot faster. And now with this, the business teams are really looking to take advantage of this and bring out features that the customers and their users really need. And as they do this on platforms, it's no longer just code changes that have to be done to be able to deploy these features or bring in these new user experiences. A lot of times, business is able to make just configuration changes on these platforms or just change content, and that content can drive user experience, or updates to data on these platforms also varies user experience. So we see all these kind of variations. So change in digital applications today comes from a variety of different areas. They could be in features that you're rolling out, or changes to content and information or data, and then the underlying platforms themselves. So if you look at some of the leading platforms in the market today, the Oracle platforms, from Oracle, from Salesforce, from all the other leading vendors, what you see is that these vendors are also pushing out changes or upgrades to their platform. And when you are in a cloud realm, you don't have a choice as a merchant or as a business that has implemented one of these solutions. You can no longer say, I don't want to take this upgrade. I'm going to be fine in my own silo the way I was in a premise install application. You have to take these upgrades if you need to, and you cannot get behind. So now there is constant change that you as a business are not mandating, but your vendor or your platform is mandating. You have to manage that, and you have to be able to test for that. And same thing, as you have integrated these systems into the rest of your business applications, there could be changes that are happening in those other applications. So in the digital world, change comes at you from all directions in a lot of the ways that you may or may not have control over, but you have to be able to accommodate those changes. And I wouldn't necessarily say, well, you react in certain cases, but you actually have to be able to act and be proactive about testing to make sure that change doesn't adversely impact customer experience. So what we are seeing across all the customers is in the digital age, the amount of testing has increased, the volume as testing has significantly increased, and the cadence has also increased. So all in all, there's changes happening at a much faster pace, and the demands on testing has increased significantly.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you talked about, Badri, which is the platform updates, right? As system integrators, we're always coping with this, right? Just Oracle Cloud Commerce now makes 3 releases in every quarter. And they've done a fantastic job of publishing what the changes are all about. But
Mhm.
for us to keep up with testing, considering that we're implementing in the short timelines, and you said the backend integration, that is important for us. So I definitely agree that these are some of the things that are very relevant. And no doubt, the new feature launches are all a widget away. That's the terminology we end up using today in the SaaS platform. So I also wanted to talk about what we faced as traditionally, because I know, we have to contrast what it is that we were inquiring, right? So when I look about how we used to do it, right? It's manual testing, and we traditional testing was all about being manual, and then there was some legacy tools, workstation-based tools. Then there were, of course, frameworks that we built for ourselves. Why? Because we thought we were smart engineers. Not that we were not smart, but we saw issues. In manual, of course, it's very clear, super expensive. You take a dedicated resource who is a developer, convert them into a tester, and make him do the stuff. That's an expense in itself. No doubt there were errors. And yes, we couldn't scale it for every project because it was not reusable. Then we were also figuring out where we had outdated tech. Some of the testing cases were siloed. It was not scaling. We definitely did not accomplish full regression. And of course, complex skill set and our frameworks had to be maintained. And overall, we thought it was expensive. I'm sure you agree to some of these points, at least, right? I mean, that's why you built what you built.
Ab- Absolutely, absolutely. So everybody understands it's a no-brainer when you say manual is not going to solve the problem. One, it's definitely not scalable. Even if you can throw an army at it, you can never complete all your testing in a timely manner. You talked about the monthly release cadence that Oracle Commerce Cloud has. And in order to be able to roll out, adapt that, you need to be able to complete your testing in a day or two. And there's no way you can provision an army just for that 1 or 2 days to do all your testing. And then what are you going to do with them the rest of the days? Right? So you need to think through this. So manual is definitely not going to work. On the far end of it, when we talk about homegrown frameworks, these are typically built, we've seen it built on open source tools and platforms. And there's that siren song of like, hey, it's free. I want to do something. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, right? If you think about it, most of the customers we encounter that are using e-commerce platforms like OCC or others, why are they using these platforms? Because they have decided that the old approach of going and getting an open source shopping cart widget, an open source checkout or payment processing widget, and then cobbling together your own e-commerce application is no longer worth their while. It's not, they're not in the business of building e-commerce software, and they shouldn't be in the business of building test automation software either, because these are just tools that allow them to get their testing done quicker. So this is where we have seen a lot of companies that have gone down this path have realized that this is not really an efficient or effective approach for them to build and maintain and accomplish their testing. End of the day, what they want to do is accomplish their testing in a timely manner. And that's where they are moving away from these approaches to a more robust solution for testing and test automation.
I agree with you, Badri. So the one thing I also wanted to say, right, on all of this, the traditional testing, what was the key call out for me is what you said. As system integrators, we're not in the business of building e-commerce software. I agree with the same spirit. We're also not in the business of building frameworks of for testing because we a technology is a skill set that we want to leverage. Speed is our only weapon, other than the technology skill set that we have. So I agree with you. But Badri, I think let me share a story. I think you can relate to this also because you were a part of the story with our customer who was a Canadian customer who dealt with automation parts. Let's talk about that story so it makes more sense of what we're talking about. So
Absolutely.
I, I'm I'm talking about one of our customers who was a big Canadian retailer, and he had some challenges. So I want to cover this in parts and pieces in a multiple slides, Badri. The reason is I want us to talk about each one.
Sure.
The biggest was what you talked about: accomplish the QA in the shortest timeline possible, and the release cadence, which is features as well as the upgrades. And the shorter timelines was, let me contextualize it. We had to execute test cases on 9 different platforms spread across multiple browser sets and real devices. And that was our challenge. So that's one of the reasons why we came to you. When we came to you, that's one of the reasons why we came to you, because we had to accomplish this all in the agile world of 2 sprint cycles or 3 sprint cycles based on how your agile sprint runs. And we had to deliver non regressive functional code in a platform across 9 platforms and all the primary. Of course, we ended up using your software and it's fantastic. Maybe you should speak about how you helped us in all of this.
Sure. I think the primary benefits you had from using Eureka was with the cloud testing capability. In all of this, you you touched upon two things, two benefits that you got. The one is the cadence with which you were able to test, the speed and scale with which you were able to test, and the browser device coverage that you were able to get. Both of those are a result of the way Eureka platform is built. So Eureka is built natively on the cloud. It's a multi-tenant SaaS application, so there is nothing for your team did not have to install different versions of the software, manage it, and so on. They were able to get on and get working on it right away, and they were able to start testing very quickly. And being able to scale that testing on the cloud on different browsers and devices is what helped your team complete all the testing they need in a very timely manner and achieve the coverage across those different browsers and devices. So they were able to do all of that without having to bat an eyelid, without having to even spend a single second thinking about how am I going to manage a framework, or how am I going to provision a certain browser or device or a version of a browser, etc. So all of that they had to completely forget about, and they just focused on building their automation and running the tests.
Correct. So we also wanted to achieve testing coverage, which is, one of those holy grails that all of us try and achieve, which is get at least when we We didn't. It was all 65 to 70%. But in cloud, we want to achieve quite a bit more. And we also want to make sure a consistency of the user experience, irrespective of all of that, and we can afford downtime because of feature changes. So one of the things that we had was achieve test coverage for all the database scenarios. One of the reasons is commerce is a transactional and functional state-based system where we have had to do all of that. What I thought was important was we had this challenge of testing coverage and great experience no matter what browser device. I do think that when we used Eureka, we ended up doing the data-driven testing, which expanded the test coverage like quite a bit. And I think we're very happy with all the user pathway testing, the boundary condition testing, and the complete functional testing. And I do think that one thing that you brought us into the concept of testing 90% of the revenue, which was a fantastic aspect for us. What I mean by that is the features that generate 90% of the revenue needs to be tested no matter what. And I did think we achieved that. The results were we, of course, had 88% of the regression test coverage, and we had 90% on browser device coverage and about 90% of revenue coverage. So maybe
Yeah,
we talk a little bit about some of the
sure.
platform features that we utilized.
Yeah, you touched upon data-driven testing. That is a key differentiator in the capabilities that Eureka provides. Everybody does data-driven testing. They say, okay, we can put in test data and run automation with it. But the way the Eureka platform does data-driven testing is unique and it's very robust. So we look at everything that changes as potentially data for a purpose of data-driven testing. So you can test content changes, you can test different sites that are built for different locales, language differences, currency differences. All of that can be used with data-driven testing, can be tested. You can also do, when you think about a B2B commerce scenario, you can even bring in things like custom catalogs, contract pricing, testing promotions in a retail setting. All of that can be done very easily with data-driven testing. And those were some of the features that your team was able to use to really give you that expanded coverage from a testing point of view, where you didn't have to build thousands of test cases. You could build a limited set of workflows that covered all these possibilities and then expand the coverage by just varying data. And that is what allowed you to achieve that 88% coverage very quickly. The second point with testing cross-browser device, we talked about it a little in the previous, when we talked about the previous slide. The thing that we recommend to all our customers, e-commerce customers, is testing is all about making sure that you have a great user experience and then you don't lose revenue, right? So, and today's date, with the majority of customers, especially for retail or fast fashion or any of these industries being on mobile devices, it is very important to make sure that you get adequate coverage from testing on all these devices. And we would actually encourage customers to test for at least 80 to 90% of the devices that contribute to 80 to 90% of your revenue. And we would actually go a step further and ask our customers to track even conversion rates on these devices and see if, after you start using Eureka and run through these tests, how those conversion rates varies. Because a lot of times we've seen customers finding issues on devices that they never even bothered testing, and when they look at the conversion rates, they see on some of these devices the conversion rates are pretty low, whereas on other devices from a similar audience demographic, the conversion rates are probably twice or three times that. And there's no real way to explain that difference other than saying there should be some problem with that, with the experience on that device. And testing specifically on these devices will help you identify, give you an opportunity to fix that, and then see how you benefit from in increased conversion. Don't you think so, Roy? Have you guys come across issues of customers talking about different conversion
In our
rates?
consumer side, yeah, in our consumer side, yes, on the mobile devices, we have a huge spread on the consumer side apps where customers used to be of different scale, size and scale. We used to have a customer in Brazil called Netshoes who had 10 million customers. So we definitely encountered that. On the B2B though, the contrast I have to give you is what you brought up as the scenarios, the contractualizing, the catalog aspect, and the currency. The reason is in B2B scenarios, we have various configurations of different pricing, but for the same customer, if he comes as a different person, from a different organization, he would see a different pricing. So those scenarios were important for us in the B2B aspect of it, especially in the PA side. Those I think were very critical, and the small workflows that would cover some specific buying scenarios, I think those were also important because we couldn't design every combination of that workflow, but we had to just configure a few and we were able to achieve coverage. So those are kind of critical in the case study that we're talking about.
Okay.
So moving on, right? Let's move on to a few more experiences that we saw. But one of the other things was we had to replace testing team. One of the things we didn't want to overload was we had to deliver a certain velocity in the agile team, right? Uh, We had to develop a automation that was reliable. It wouldn't change with different test frameworks, right? We have the Mojitos of the world, then we have something else. We keep changing, and they keep changing. We have to maintain the platform. We have the overhead of actually developing and maintaining the platform. Then we have to take a testing team which is specifically dedicated and develop automation. So I believe we were challenged. It's a disservice to the client also. Why? Because testing more or less, other than the regression and all the other aspects that we talked about on the technology delivery, what we saw was an SME aspect. What I mean by that is every business has key, crucial, critical use cases that the SMEs can scope for on the work function places. I would rather use them to develop this testing rather than a tester who does not understand the business to develop testing. That was one of the key focus points. So what happened for us was we didn't have to hire skilled automation resources just for framework development and testing, but we were able to use leverage developers for what they're good at, delivering functional code and enable SMEs to build onto that testing. That I think was a fantastic aspect of this experience for us, which is that scriptless automation where an SME comes in, does everything, and there were other aspects of, oh, can you also do the automation testing of various integrations, the APIs, and I think that's where we saw quite a bit of advantage, Badri.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more because that is the premise on which the platform has been built in the first place. So when we set out to build Eureka, we said testers should not be developers. So the people, what we had seen in the past is companies saying, okay, we're going to just hire some programmers, they're going to build some automation for us, and then we're going to run that. The folks building automation had no clue about the business. And so the tests that they ended up building were just catching the low-hanging fruit. They really did not test any of the real core business scenarios, and they could never think upon the complex scenarios or what ifs, what happens when this happens, and when a user does a certain thing within the business. They could never comprehend these or come up with this. They had to rely on a subject matter expert who didn't necessarily understand the technology and couldn't necessarily translate it in a way that the developer would understand or be able to program. So it was a complex mess. So right from the outset, we said this has to be built for the subject matter expert, the domain expert that can actually do some valuable testing using the platform. And that's where the scriptless automation comes into play. And with Eureka, you can actually do some fairly complex automation combining different interfaces. You can perform operations on a user interface, whether it's a browser interface or a mobile app. And in the very next step of a scenario, you can make a call to a service. It could be a microservice or another backend system you're using, or you could make a call to a database to retrieve or verify if information has been persisted correctly in the database. So being able to do all of these in a scriptless, programming-less automation fashion was critical, and it's one of the most powerful capabilities of Eureka. And there are tools, authoring and debugging tools built into the QA Scribe authoring tool that really makes it very easy for the SME to do this, build and maintain automation.
Yep. Thanks, Badri, for that. I think that was the key, like you said, right? The SME, giving back the control to the SME. In some of our cases, the client felt a big part of it because he was like, okay, I am participating in an actual development process where I am not being handicapped for the lack of understanding of tech, and I'm actually being utilized for my business knowledge. That I thought was a important psychological point that we enforced in a client to be a part of the team. So I think that was a huge win on our side also.
Right.
So a few thing is the last one, right? Without beating the same thing again, what we said was framework in house was a big challenge. We wanted your platform to help us. We had a ton of framework development and time saver. But what attracted us was all the artificial intelligence and the locating elements and the reliable script aspects. We know that you incorporated AI, and today there's a lot of talk of AI and machine learning in testing. But I think it's important to explain to the audience what this AI was all about. So we should talk about the test, the triage process, how we were able to get into the root cause and all of that, which I think maybe you should talk a little bit about, Badri, because you can explain
Sure.
how you're leveraging AI here.
Sure. So, connecting back to the point that I made earlier, where we said it has to be easy for a subject matter expert to build and maintain automation. We also knew that anytime you build automation, or any type of software development you do, there's a lot of mechanics involved around it, right? There's a lot of heavy lifting that has to be done that don't necessarily add a high level of business value, but are absolutely required to make things work right. So that's what typically people end up building, programming, and that's what takes the most time when you build software. So we said that is not something that a person building automation should have to worry about. That is something that the platform should take care, and should take care in a way that is seamless to the end user, the person building the automation. So that's where we invested heavily in building AI and machine learning capabilities into the platform. So one of the examples, one of the areas where your team found immediate value is the way in which Eureka identifies elements on the screen. So one of the challenges people building automation face is as applications change, or even in e-commerce app, you're constantly changing the look and feel of the screen to kind of enhance the user experience. Any of those changes typically ended up breaking automation scripts. That's one of the areas we focused on. The way Eureka identifies those elements on the screen does it in a way that even if you make changes to it, Eureka is still able to identify it. It's very robust. So it eliminated a lot of the flakiness that you see with other automation solutions. And it made the tests more robust and more resilient to these minor changes. The other area that we felt is, we all understand automation helps reduce the time to test. But another piece of the puzzle that automation did not solve is what happens when you find an error. You still had to go actually look through your code, look through your log files, look through a variety of different areas to find out what actually went wrong. You know that the test failed, but why did it fail? Was it an application issue? Was it a data issue? Was it a configuration issue? You don't know. So in Eureka, we have machine learning that will learn from past errors. So once you roll out Eureka initially for the first month or so, first few iterations, when anything fails, you tell Eureka what happened, what failed, and Eureka learns from that, learns from your specific application and your specific error patterns, and it's able to now automatically triage failures. So we see that as a significant reduction in effort, post-testing effort. So it's a significant reduction in the effort you have to put into maintain your testing and also report results from your testing. So your overall testing costs go down and testing time goes down because Eureka now is able to not only tell you where your tests fail, but also tell you why your tests failed. So with self-healing tests, it takes it the next step further is as your application changes, instead of you having to go make changes to your test automation scripts, Eureka will automatically be able to make those changes. So Eureka can say, I think this is an actual change in the application, so I'm going to go and update the tests. And you have of course, you have the option to turn that on or off or review it. But on the whole, it significantly reduces the effort. And we anticipate that this will reduce overall testing time, even with automation, by at least about 25-30% for most organizations that have used Eureka for about 6 months or more.
At least in the development side, Badri, I would agree with you on that 25% number because of the self-healing aspect, right? Because we're
Mm-hmm.
continuously changing and we're developing in an agile fashion. The UI screen elements are changing, stuff is going here and there, and it's not all the data at this point in time. And the self-healing part of it actually came to our rescue in quite a few places.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the end of all of this testing was also that we had to provide our client reports, right, on what was going on, what was, can we deploy, and then we had to continuously be testing it because we're deploying code. There were like 4 developers working on 3 branches, committing code, deploying to the environment. So we had to have a continuous integration, which we are currently doing. I don't think we have it fully there, and we wanted advanced reporting where we had to show all the analytics of how many unit tests were executed, what is the functional test executed. So I believe the reports that we got from the platform was fantastic. And the RCAs that you talked about, the root cause analysis, the failed run report, all of those and this continuous testing cycle, I think was very critical for us. So that I think has been a fun thing, which is looking at all the reporting, the DevOps cycles where we do the continuous integration. Then we are looking at our Jira ticket integration and figuring out what all has been committed, where are the failures occurring. So our project management got, whether it is a Scrum leader or the PO or whoever, starts to understand more and more about where the issues were occurring. So I think that was the end result over there was fantastic in terms of reporting.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we have focused on right from the beginning is to make sure that one, we of course collect a ton of data. Every aspect of the test that is run, we collect and store a ton of data about the test. Now we want to be able to present this data in a way that is easy to consume, easy to understand, because we've constantly felt with automated tests there was this big step of somebody having to go through, pour through log files and put together reports and then present it to senior management or present it to the project manager. And there was so much time that was being wasted in that process, and they really couldn't get, and your senior management or business owners couldn't get information the way they wanted it. So that's why the things, when we built our reporting in Eureka, we made it completely customizable and also built it in such a way that you could compare results across different test runs. So one of the common questions that was asked is, okay, I got 90% success rate or 10% failure. How does it compare to last time or last 3 releases? Am I doing better? Am I doing worse? you should just be able to, at a click or two, you should be able to get that information rather than having somebody go pour through data to get that. So those were some of the premise that we used to build this automation. You talked about integration with Jira. We also can integrate with Slack, which is getting more and more popular these days. So automatically pushing releases information to a Slack channel so that somebody doesn't actually have to go and try to figure out what happened. They're automatically notified when when tests complete and the status of the results. That is probably the most sought after feature we are seeing from our customers. Pretty much most of the customers we talk to are saying, yeah, we want that integration. We want to see it on our Slack channel. And in terms of DevOps integrations, we took an approach of keeping our integration really open, making it completely services based. So we can integrate with any CI/CD tool or issue tracking tool that accepts an open interface. So if you can talk the REST, you'll be able to integrate with Eureka. And we typically have seen that we actually publish more data, more detail than most systems are able to consume. So it actually is a mapping exercise that we typically get involved in, where we kind of show them how to get all that data, consume it, and present it in a usable manner. So that is something that I think your team is going through the steps right now, integrating it into the continuous process. You're going to see real benefits from that. And I know you're already seeing a lot of benefits from that reporting and the detail information that you're getting about the test execution.
Correct. Testing on every build, I think, will be one of those things for us. So, I think, Badri, I think we've almost come to the conclusion of the case study. I think we should summarize a little bit on what we learned, right? Look, when I look at the entire e-commerce scope, we have to deliver for speed, specific function, the B2B use cases, the data changes, the cadence, the coverage, and the various forms and functions where the application gets used to in different devices, browsers, and applications. Needless to say, the operational aspects of root cause, continuous failures, continuous development, reporting. I do believe you guys helped us out quite a bit in all of these regions, which kind of is making for a robust delivery. But I also think there is the platform aspect to it, which in your case, I think it was your platform that we spoke more and more, because every part and function has different feature sets. Maybe you should kind of summarize on where all you covered it. So this makes sense for the audience on what they have to look at in a platform and they're evaluating a testing platform as such.
Right. So there are many things that come in when you're evaluating a testing platform. I can talk about what we kind of looked at all of that, and we tried to bring all of that within the Eureka platform, bring it in one place, because we typically had seen silos of test automation and organization, people using something for UI testing, web applications testing, something else for API testing, something else for performance testing, and so on. So we felt that since all of these are all related to the same application, it helps to bring all of these together on a single platform. And that is what we have done with Eureka, having a single platform to meet all the test automation needs. And by test automation, we are assuming that automation is a given, that you have to do it to be able to meet the needs, the volume and the speed needs of your application testing. You cannot do without automation. So then you need a platform that covers everything. So whether you're testing functionality, doing regression testing, whether you're making sure your application works right on different browsers and devices, whether you're making sure you're testing your microservices. This could be something you might still be building the application. You might have built out the services first, or you're building a headless commerce solution, because this is catching on in a number of companies right now where they're deploying headless commerce solutions. Being able to test APIs is critical for that. Or then testing databases and being able to validate information and being able to do all of these in a single scenario, have a comprehensive end-to-end scenario that encompasses all this, you should be able to do it without having to cobble together tools. And that's what you can do with Eureka. And of course, then leveraging some of these to say, here's I've built this functional situation simulating a user coming into the site and performing a transaction. Now I want to have a few thousand of these or tens of thousands of these users hitting my site and performing different transactions. I shouldn't have to go and rebuild that entire automation again. I should be able to leverage what I have and use that for performance testing, and you can do that with Eureka. And same thing with monitoring, making sure that not only that your site is up, but your users can actually transact business, and every user pathway is functional and performs within acceptable limits at all times. So being able to do all that in a single platform, we felt was very important, and we are seeing that being really accepted by the audience that we are talking to, the companies we are talking to, because they love the fact that all of these are available in a single platform under a single subscription and usage.
Correct. So that is one thing I do agree with, because we don't want to build different test cases. Look, let me translate this to what it is, the world without a platform that can handle all of this. For us, automation, building, testing framework was one thing. Continuous integration and building it into a DevOps cycle was another piece of software. Then we had to do API testing, which had to be built in a different way, which is another piece of testing. And for mobile and cross-device testing, which was another custom aspect. So, and monitoring was a different software in itself. So
And you had different
definitely for
skill
us,
sets for each of these.
correct. And we have to have DevOps, testing, development engineers, and the client involved in all of this. I can only imagine the horror stories in this situation, right? But
Absolutely.
there's also the operational aspects, right? But when we look at this automation, we still have issues because we underestimate it.
Mhm.
The one of the following key things I look at is, oh, testing is an oft ignored uh, aspect of any code and application deployment, yet it takes the most time. And UATs, and which is not relevant anymore in the agile world, but if you do follow the UAT cycle in some critical application space, it still becomes the bottleneck. I think there must be a few things that we have to advise our audience to consider when they talk about testing. Maybe you should talk a little bit about what you've seen between your customers, and that way we can call a conclusion to this presentation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Operationalizing automation is absolutely critical. So one of the things we had always seen, the fact you said that not much thought has been given to this, is simply because building automation previously was a complex problem to solve, that just saying, hey, I built 20% automation, people thought that was really successful. They were being successful. Okay, how much are you using it? Well, I'm not sure. I built it, right? So we've now that you can actually build and run automation that easily, it's more important to see how you get value out of this automation. The value is derived only when you automate, only when you operationalize it. So I just want to touch upon four main areas that we typically see. So make sure when you, even as you plan out your automation, we would ask our users, our customers, to understand, plan what tests they want to use as functional tests to kind of show that the application is working functionally, and then breaking out the cross-browser or cross-device type of test. You don't need to run every single functional test across different browsers and devices. You can run a subset of that. So identifying those, what are functional versus what is your cross-browser subset going to look like? Smoke versus regression. So you want to run tests every time you do a build. You can do it every time you do a build for release to UAT, but your developers can use a subset of those tests as well. Say if I'm a developer that's building a small feature and I want to roll out this feature into my integration environment, but I want to make sure that I haven't broken something else, I should be able to quickly run a set of tests without having to build those tests myself to make sure that nothing else is broken. And I should be able to leverage what is already built in within the enterprise repository. So if you break your tests up or organize them into smoke and regression and so on, that should make it easy. And one of the things that we have done within Eureka is that we've seen previously people making copies of tests. Here's my copy of smoke test, regression test. You don't have to make copies in Eureka. You can just store things by reference. So even a single test can be used in multiple different areas. So organizing your tests and scheduling the test to run at specific times requires some thought, and we would encourage you to start thinking about it earlier than later. Then also, when you run the test, managing your test data. So that's another area. When you run tests with automation, you're going to be running tests at a much larger scale. So especially if you're now doing testing, I'm going to take an example with e-commerce, testing with registered users. Now, if I'm with cloud-based testing like in Eureka, I can run tens or hundreds of tests in parallel on the cloud. But if I end up using the same user account to run all those tests, my tests are going to start stepping on each other. So making sure that I have adequate number of user accounts to run the tests, making sure if I'm doing checkouts and if I'm doing placing orders, making sure that I have sufficient inventory of my products in my test system or staging system, making sure that I have adequate coupon codes, gift cards. If I'm using single-use coupons, then making sure I have a way of automatically retrieving coupons. You might want to make a call to your system that generates those coupons and use those coupons in your test. So these are all things that require planning. So now you're getting into the more figuring out how am I going to design my test rather than how am I going to code a specific test. Then making sure that you cover all the payment options, there's adequate test payment cards, etc. available. And also we talked about earlier being able to increase test coverage through just data variations, making sure that you incorporate all those data variations to get that wide coverage, to make sure that you test those edge conditions, make sure that we test all those unique combinations so that you can catch errors. We have had situations where you could pay, for example, you could actually pay to ship something to a different country, but then when you actually ran it, it didn't work because you couldn't calculate some other logistics or shipping costs for that country. So things that had never been contemplated within the testing, you were able to catch it by just varying this data. So make sure you leverage the power of automation to allow you to build this coverage. The other areas is if you're doing continuous testing, it's important for you to be able to group your test results, to be able to say, how did my test for this build or this version of the application differ from the previous version? So we use a concept of labeling. It could be your build IDs or job IDs or release numbers. It could be any label that you can assign. So making sure that you have a proper system for that is well understood by everybody and consistently used, and integrating with your issue tracking systems. If you're using similar labeling mechanisms or tagging mechanisms in your issue tracking systems, you can have all your tools talk the same language. And also making sure that you build in things like exception handling and notifications so that you're able to catch issues earlier on and notify the appropriate people at the right time, especially if there are critical issues encountered during your test execution. Finally, one piece of advice to everybody that has implemented automation, and this is a common challenge that people have, is that, again, when you build, you look at success as having built automation, but your journey just starts then. So we would ask, after all the effort you've taken to build automation, don't let your automation go stale, which means run your tests more frequently, as often as possible, and that allows you to identify where your tests are getting stale. you would also be able to run across all devices, all journeys, all platform, expand the scope of your testing and the coverage, and then review the results as frequently as possible. And if something is no longer being used, get rid of those tests. Don't clutter your system. Just like with your regular code management, you have to make sure your automation suite is managed correctly and your testing volumes are kept manageable. Then finally, the onus of making sure there is visibility and maintain and value being reaped out of automation comes with the business owner, because it's the business owner that really is impacted by by poor quality. It could be your VP of e-commerce or your VP of development, whoever is responsible for making sure that customer experience doesn't suffer. They're the ones they should get visibility into the results of automation and make sure that quality is maintained. So that's going to be critical.
So the one thing, Badri, in all of this, thank you for summarizing that. But one thing was the test cycle labeling, which I want to bring attention to for the audience. If you want to know your loss table build, I've never seen any of us. We manufacture, we look at the release by release numbers and release features, but the last stable build that needs to go into production, I love the test cycle labeling this aspect because we were able to look at the test cycle results by the same release number label, figure out it was the most stable build, and if we had to roll back, where do we have to roll back to? So those I thought were exceptionally fantastic for us. And needless to say, the data scenarios of inventory, where we run out of, because we are in the B2B space, we run out of more inventory use cases where we have to keep the right inventory to test all the functionality. That I thought was also an important aspect. So I agree with you. Operationalizing automation needs a lot more thought and making sure that it's an integral part of your development. And I could not have said it better. Thank you, Badri. And I think with that, we're pretty much
Thank you, Roy.
done for this slide. But Sarah, over to you if you have any questions. But the request for the audience is please stay in touch. Here's our contact info.
Hi, yes, thank you, Roy and Badri. I think we have a lot to think about from this conversation. It was a lot of really interesting information. We have a little bit of time to answer some of the questions submitted. You can still enter them in the little panel. A couple that I wanted to make sure to get to. The first one is specifically about the case study. How many shipping option scenarios were automated in the case study you presented?
I think we have about three to five shipping automation scenarios, which were, I think, it was the standard shipping, express shipping, and I think, Badri, I think you also know about this, right, with our automation case?
Not off the top of my head, I wouldn't. But overall, we have handled a variety of different shipping and delivery options across different, not for this case study, but across different ones. We've handled cash on delivery. We've handled different payment options. So we're actually working with a prospective customer here. They actually place the order and accept payments a couple of days later. And so, different variations are very easy to implement with from an automation point of view here.
Yeah, as to our case study, Sarah, we did have all the three, express, regular, and expedited shipping.
Great, thank you. Also, one more that we'll see if we can do it quickly. A question for you both. If you're thinking about moving to cloud-based apps, when do I need to start thinking of testing and figure that out in my roadmap?
So if if the question is when do I start thinking of testing? Sorry, Roy, do you want to take that? As you guys migrate, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask what the question was. I didn't hear it fully, but thanks. I caught on to it now.
Yeah, so the question was, when do I start thinking of testing?
Correct.
So do you want to take?
If you ask me as a system integrator, week one. Because as soon as my first sprint as soon as my first sprint is done week one. The reason I say that is I can ship code if I'm in an agile cycle. I'm shipping code every 2 weeks. It might not be production shipped in the case of a platform for a B2B enterprise. I'm still committing code to demos and other aspects. So week one is really the test. The automation has a lag time because you can develop all automation in one day. You continue to progressively develop automation as you go forward in the application building aspect. But the plan and the strategy for testing should start from week one. That's my take on it, at least. Badri.
Absolutely. I was actually going to say week 0, but week 1's good enough. So we're not too late at that point. But you have to think about testing right in the beginning. It's not just what software are you going to implement, or what platform are you going to implement. Just as you're going to figure out who's going to do it, you're also going to understand how you're going to test it, because you are thinking about how to make sure that you're getting what you want to get, right? You spent all this money on this platform or on implementing it. How do you know if you're getting what you paid for? And the only way you do that is with testing. So you have to start thinking about that testing right up front.
Great. Well, thank you both. Thanks to everyone for attending today. If you have any more questions, you have our contact information. You can reach me. I'm sarah.falcon@objectedge.com. After this webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation. So if you have any feedback, please leave it there. We'd really appreciate it. And you'll also receive a follow-up email with a link to a recording of today's webinar for you, and feel free to share it. So on behalf of Object Edge, our presenters, thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Badri. Thank you, Sarah. Bye, everybody.